as we move from that and we get into 2020, I think a lot of these things become really relative to what's gone on. And we'd like to learn a little bit more about how you applied those lessons from your life to all the tumultuous times that have been going on this year, especially as it surrounds things like Black Lives Matter and all the protests that have went on and the social injustice that has gone on in our country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty interesting as maybe a latecomer in really getting involved, but to build on this idea that there are injustices. We've seen injustices in the world. We can recall situations where we were quite close to some pretty awful things. Really helps us think, this isn't going to solve itself if we don't take action. The people that I've seen who've been disadvantaged in one way or another weren't going to recover without participation from all of us, right? I mean, it takes participation. And so it's been really interesting as it's become a phenomenon, across the country, if you will. There's been so many opportunities to step into that space and go, I'm going to change and do my part. I'm going to participate as best I can to make sure that this is, there's enough voices for change. And I think that's, I think that's something that we, especially as white people, need to really consider very, very carefully how we can help that.
Also, I think specifically with George Floyd's murder, I was thinking about this earlier, Elodie. A lot of the other atrocities, the murders that happened in the news, Trayvon Martin and Breonna Taylor, we heard about them in the news. And it's kind of like I even think about even writing when I was growing up in Watts and different things, like you saw things on the news and you think, oh, isn't that terrible? Because you're kind of looking at it from above, from a media perspective, George Floyd was the first time where it was somebody, for me, where it was somebody's phone and it wasn't a reaction to violence. It was, that wasn't the reasoning, a reaction to violence or whatever, there wasn't this like, oh, it was this heated situation. It was like slow, premeditated murder that was slowly happening in front of our eyes from somebody's phone that was right there. And the horror of that, I think, really, I mean, for me personally, was like, oh okay. I think that was the big difference.
Yeah. Okay. So it was, so for you personally, it was that the personal perspective. It was that like one person's perspective of this situation and not so much that there was a lot of commotion happening behind and this was the result and that's a bummer.
Or that it's like a news camera catching a shot and, or a reporter telling the story. This was, it was like we were living it, like we were right there. And that was the first time for me personally that because I haven't lived that experience, where I can imagine, for every person of color who has lived that experience their whole life, every one of those, you go, oh, I can relate. But for me as a white person, it was the first time I was able to I was forced to step into it empathetically instead of, oh, isn't that so horrible?
What about for you, Steve? Was there, Kelly talked about that there have been previous killings and previous brown and black bodies being just killed on the street. Is there one that you can pinpoint that really helped open your eyes to the challenges and the just the inequalities of brown and black bodies?
Yeah, I don't know if it's just if there's a specific incident. I think that I suffer from being desensitized, like you know, Rodney King, and you know, I mean, you've seen so many incidents, you know, and they're there, there's a lot of commotion, and then they're gone, and you become desensitized to it if it's not your experience. And so, I mean, I really do think that is what we're coming to grips with now is I'm not allowing myself to be desensitized with the current situation. I mean, I think even Black Lives Matter 5 or 6 years ago, kind of when they first came out, it was another group's campaign, right? This time, with a couple of very, very horrific murders and things, suddenly it's like, no, if we're going to be effective, we've got to join.
This is our campaign.
This is our campaign too. And I think that change, I'm not going to allow myself to be desensitized and other it, move it, you know, it's somebody else's thing. And so it's been a gradual thing. But what I've seen is when I take a step toward the solution.
I think that definitely helps me because that was, I'm not gonna lie, that was a very, very real thing for me to grasp in 2020 when it came to just the overall amount of white people that were marching and, you know, putting up Black Lives Matter on their window. And I, for weeks, was like, I don't get it. Like, this isn't new, you know, like, and,
Right.
and I'm like, I don't get it. And so I really appreciate what both of you said, you know, of, for you, Kelly, it being that, the form in which you saw George Floyd's murder, you know, that it wasn't, like you said, like it wasn't a cameraman, it wasn't someone recalling a situation, you saw it the way that it was, like in real time, essentially, you know. And then Steve, you talking about like not being desensitized to it and really like putting yourself with the group, you know, putting yourself with the cause, and that has been that change for you.
It's important because some of the conversations, especially that talk we had about white privilege, and I'm with you, Steve, on part of the desensitization. But I do think this is an area of privilege that we need to tap into, because if this was reversed, if Rodney King was a white man being beat by a black cop, or if this was Eric Gardner was a white man being choked out by a black cop, or if George Floyd, again, was a white man being murdered by a black cop, this would not be a desensitization for us. And I think we have to own that and say, if those roles were reversed, we wouldn't allow ourselves to be desensitized. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I do think that is something in our society and culturally that's too easy. You wanted to say something, Elodie?
No, I was just gonna say, like another fascination that I have when it comes to, you know, the news of another unarmed black man being murdered. It's kind of like, what is that narrative that is being played in the minds of white people who are watching it, and kind of like what that difference was for George Floyd, and why this one was the one that kind of really just opened up the floodgates, you know. And like Steve, like you said, it really, I think a lot of white people were able to see what we've been yelling about, what we've been crying about, you know, and able to attach themselves and see it as their issue as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Come
Yeah.
home.
I also think having conversations with Black sisters, people who are my dear, dear friends, who I've never had the conversation with before. Like, how long have I known you? And we haven't talked about this. I mean, my fault. Like, but just assuming that it was, you were good. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Yeah,
and
that's privilege.
that's privilege.
Yeah.
No, that's my privilege right there. Just assuming, and now having the privilege to hear those stories and understand that it's every time you go out your door.
I'm super grateful for you guys for just sharing what you shared and just the insight. I know that it was very helpful for me to get, just a little bit more perspective on the narrative and your guys' perspective of just what's going on. With everything you guys are learning in 2020 and everything that you've shared, how has your faith grown or been challenged as you guys are learning more about the ins and outs and lives of brown and Black people and just like the challenges and stuff like that?
I think in recognizing our privilege, there's also a Christian element to that too, a Christian privilege, if you will, that we have to address, that we think as Christians, of course we're not racist, we're Christians. We love everybody. And so I think that is that's been really challenging. Of course, we're all sinners. We all sin. But I think we can kind of take pride in our Christian foundations that we would never, because we're Christians.
Yeah.
And then realizing that, oh, maybe we do. And maybe that it runs through, that thread can run through our church community without us recognizing it.
Yeah.
Right.
And how do we address that? And how do we maintain unity within the church while we're addressing it? Having that humility to really hear people's stories and your impact on that.
Yeah, I think for me, as I've thought a lot about this issue and read my Bible and kind of picked it apart and tried to find scriptures to sort of narrate the story that I'm trying to build about what we're supposed to be in as humans on this life in a godly way. And I think so much has come, popping off the pages about Jesus's compassion, like how he went through his ministry, going from one form of under-recognized population to another. And I think that the compassion that Jesus showed over and over and over again just kind of now pops off the page, because you see those hurts, those in the eyes of those that are being affected. And I can only imagine Jesus being touched and wanting to work for their cause. That gives me purpose as a Christian, as a disciple, as somebody who wants to imitate Jesus.
Right.
It's right there. It pops off when you're reading it with the context that we're in right now and considering it just pops off the page.
Yeah.
There are so many scriptures.
How do we
And
practically take that forward? How do we model that back?
Just really consider the people who you interact with and give them certainly the benefit of the doubt, but also the respect that around the hurts that they've felt. I mean, really connecting with people, especially those who who we all know have had difficulties in life because of a circumstance like the color of their skin, right?
Yeah.
To really work hard to be compassionate and supportive of them. I mean, Jesus would have been,
Mhm.
you know?
And yet he called everyone to repentance at the same time. He also showed compassion, to the tax collector and the Roman centurion and the rich young ruler. His heart broke for them as well. But yeah. So he's the great unifier. And so, I mean, for me, Elodie, and talking about trauma work, I think that was a huge part for me, was seeing my power, my God-given power in my ability to hold my head high and know who I was, know who I am, before God, and understanding that not everybody is going to understand what I've been through, and especially the people who were the offenders might not ever apologize or completely understand how their actions affected me long term, and having to be okay with that, and understand that forgiveness is between me and God and not between me and that person necessarily, but also understanding that no matter how hard it is to get my head around that, God wouldn't be so inefficient as to make any one thing just about me, and that I can use what I've learned and use my trauma. I mean, it definitely has, I think, helped me to become a more empathetic person, that I can sit in darkness with people, because I've been there. So, yeah, there are blessings to that for sure.
Walking in somebody else's shoes for a while can change the world.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, it says, when Jesus looked out on the crowds, he saw that they were harassed and helpless, and he had compassion. Like, he didn't look past, the crowds. He actually saw into them and saw the hurt, and he then had compassion, right? He didn't walk past them. He actually acknowledged this situation is not good, and I have compassion. And then he'd take action with that. And I think that's hard to do.
Compassion and humility.
Yes.
Things that I have a hard time with. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. We all do.
You have a lot of compassion, Elodie.
Yeah, you do. I think you
Oh, go ahead.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's very encouraging for us, and I appreciate your guys' insight. What do you think it means? We've heard a lot about this term ally. What is that for you? What does it mean to be an ally for you guys? Maybe it's not even the best term. Maybe there's a better.
Well, it's the opposite of being a bystander, right? An ally is someone who gets in there. I think that's what being an ally is being willing to get down in there and do the work alongside people who are struggling. And standing up when, even if no one else is watching, standing up for things that are just not right when you see racist behavior or racist comments or whatever.
Yeah, in as much as you can empathize to stand with them instead of in the group that's not with them, right? I mean, it's a bridge, because we hopefully can live in our privilege and be, I mean, we don't want to continue in our privilege, but we exist in our privilege and be able to use that to partner and bridge that gap, right? So that, that we can take some of the heat or make the statements that maybe somebody who's affected or is being oppressed in some way can't make because of their situation.
Getting in the fight together is a big deal, right? Jumping in there, being willing to get in the fight together and fight for the things that are right.
Yeah.
I think it's super important. Well, I definitely thank you guys again for being on here with us tonight. We appreciate you taking your time. It's been educational for us. It's very encouraging to have you here, and for how honest you've been. It's helped me, and I just really appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I learned a lot too. And I had a lot of questions coming in, and I feel like you guys definitely were very vulnerable in your answer, and it definitely taught me out. It taught me a lot as well. So thank you guys so much for.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. It was good to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks to all the viewers out there who watch us. We definitely appreciate you guys, and we appreciate you tuning in.
My skin is gold. My skin is gold. My skin is gold. And when I look in that mirror, I don't care what I'm told. No, my brothers and my sisters were gold.